Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of The Formula, where we break down and explore the elements of achievement in world-class performers. What does that even mean? It means that I, your host, Trevor Carlson, gets to sit down with people from all over the world that have achieved success in different areas of their personal or professional lives and ask them how they got there. What lessons did they learn along the way? What type of mistakes did they make that they learned from? And what advice they have to other people who want to follow a similar path. I really ask a lot of these guests just like what I'm curious about, and it just happens to work out that a lot of our listeners kind of have the same questions. This week's guest is a good friend of mine and Sculpt CEO Josh Krakauer. Josh and I have known each other for a few years now, and we've taken some trips together to South by Southwest. Josh is a really good dude, and I really appreciated him taking the time to sit down and chat with me. I do have to apologize to you guys, though. I might have had like 2 beers before we shot the interview, so I kind of bounced all over the place, but Josh was an awesome guest and kind of kept us on track. So it ended up being a really good conversation about starting and running a business, how Josh got started at Sculpt, and what his advice to other people who want to start their own business. Really a great interview if you're looking to, get any type of general business advice. And, I learned a few things and had a really good time chatting. So I hope that you guys can pick a few things up and maybe learn a few things as well. So let's get this party started with Sculpt CEO Josh Krakauer. So this week on The Formula, I have my good friend and one of the people that inspired this whole thing to get started, Sculpt CEO Josh Krakauer. How you doing tonight, Josh?
Man, I'm doing so good. I'm glad we did this in person.
Dude, me too. We had a couple beers over at Pullman in Iowa City. This is my first a couple beers deep podcast I've done so far. Okay. So I feel like it's gonna be a good one.
Feels appropriate for today, given it's South by weekend.
And it's Monday.
And they didn't need to know that.
Well, now they do. So first question, you've been running Sculpt for what, 5 years?
Yeah, 6 years.
6 years? Yeah, who's counting now? And you did some other stuff before that. So how did you get started in business and entrepreneurship in the startup world?
We were just talking before this about how I love when people pull out the lemonade stories. What did they do as a child and how did that inspire them? I don't have a lemonade story. I really don't. I feel like I did grow up inspired by entrepreneurship, but I really caught it, so to speak, in a pretty unexpected way. I was really more of a child of the internet, you would say, like web 1.0, as opposed to kind of the social network world. I was really big into internet communities. I was a car guy, and this is me taking it back to where I think it all started. Is I had a deep passion for very specific types of cars, and I remember teaching myself how to take apart a specific make and model of a car and build it from scratch without ever having owned a tool in my life. I read diagnostic manuals and joined about 100 internet communities, and I really gained an understanding of how powerful the internet was at both connecting people around a shared interest and passion, as well as around facilitating commerce. So, I've started forums, I've been a part of them, I've facilitated sponsorships there, and, by the time I went to college, I had helped many companies indirectly, without realizing it, really build a pretty substantial business through the forums that I had both created or the internet communities I had helped be a part of. And it's just a weird world when you realize how powerful something like getting to connect one-on-one with a vendor, a business, a brand online can be as a consumer. And it became something I obsessed over.
So you went from building these communities with car enthusiasts to kind of going into startup land. Was there anything that you felt like, was there something that happened or some
I don't know, something that pushed you from, being involved in these communities to, being the entrepreneur that you are now?
I've had a lot of interesting relationships that I guess sparked the business I'm in today indirectly. And, one of those was a friend who gave me a shot at helping him grow an e-commerce brand without, me really realizing what I was doing. I really gained, this is in college, now that I think about it, it was my first at-bat to take over, analytics and experiments and social ads. And I feel like that was maybe the first time I realized, wow, these tools and platforms as they're maturing are really, really powerful at targeting and at reaching a really specific person with this passion. Whereas before it was really something I just did for myself when I actually flipped the script and was given the keys to someone else's budget and ad dollars, and seeing the results. It became really powerful that there was a much bigger opportunity. I don't know otherwise. I mean, it's one of those things that really develops organically that I think you can only tell later in life when you're trying to reverse engineer your own story and be like, which one was the thing that put it over the edge? I can tell you that just like that opportunity to sort of help build someone's e-commerce brand, which I think taught me how powerful it is to start companies online in the sort of modern social era. I also had started my company in a similar fashion, sort of meeting local businesses as a student in an era where only the largest brands in the world, I think at the time, really dominated social media and were known for social media. It's a time where Mashable exclusively wrote about digital marketing and around technology, and where if you wanted to learn about how companies were using social, it was what the Fortune 1000 brands were doing. And local and small businesses in the area where we live, in Iowa City, where I was at the time, were really interested in that for that same reason. Like, they saw this as a problem. We're not connecting with our audience. They're paying attention to their phones. How do we break through? And I looked at that as that first real opportunity where this thing I was super interested in, which before was just a matter of connecting with other people with the same interest, and then became connecting with people around me and sort of a dabble in e-commerce, could then translate into an opportunity to help lots of small businesses locally just figure out how this thing works. And our first Sculpt sort of started as just a mean to help local businesses manage social at a time where no one else knew how to do it.
Yeah, so Sculpt has really started to kind of help guide these local companies and local businesses in their developing their own social strategies, like even wrapping their mind around what social actually meant. Because it was probably a lot different 6 years ago than it is now.
Yeah, I don't pretend like I started Facebook.
Right.
We are not nearly as interesting as some of our clients and the kind of companies that they run and what they've built and the game-changing and innovative technology that exists today that is built on top of social. We're a service provider. We're an agency, first and foremost. However, when we started, it was still new enough where, as you point out, there was Facebook and there was Twitter. And to many extents, it's kind of funny because I think you could build a whole business on Facebook and never do anything else today. But there's been a pretty major and substantial change, as you point out, to what the social media marketing landscape looks like. And we were literally just there to help solve that initial problem by doing organic social media management, making content, helping build audience, and tell the right story on these platforms where many people couldn't figure out how to start a Facebook page. And it's just become so much more sophisticated today. It's about data. It's about content in very nuanced ways. And we've just stayed super committed to being total obsessed weirdo nerds about how to help build brands and win in that landscape over time.
Yeah. So all right, tell me how Sculpt got started. Because I I think I've known you since after, like, post Sculpt got started, but I don't know anything about how it got started or anything about that. So walk me through that.
Student, ending college, had all those experiences we talked about, child of the internet, grew up really thinking about how communities are built and how to connect people, and had lots of experience in social before it was as developed. Facebook and Twitter and more established networks sort of grew to become a business player and are building more sophisticated ad networks and tools around this time, 2010, 2011. By the time I was finishing college at this time now, I had met my two then co-founders and classmates who sort of joined me in this mission of connecting small businesses to their customers through social media by managing it for them. Now, we literally spun this out of a class. We saw a huge opportunity locally at a time where, again, it was really reserved for the largest brands in the world to figure out social in a meaningful way. We took those same ideas and our ability to pay ourselves nothing and work really hard and hustle to build a brand locally where the ad agencies didn't exist at the time selling this kind of capability. We only did that. So we spun this out of a class where we were connected to businesses that we were building a hypothetical social media strategy for. I mean, colleges all over the country do stuff like this, where they'll connect you to local businesses or local problems to help solve it as students, and most people treat it like a student problem. You look at it as a grade, and we looked at it as a huge learning opportunity that we could spin into a real company. And so I had never met these people outside of this class. My two co-founders, John and Micah, who were with us for the first year, and we just spun this little venture problem into a small part-time agency. Everything looks like a part-time, business when you're still in school, and you kind of think you're going to move on to bigger and better things, and you don't really see the full vision, I guess, when at least we didn't, and that's, I guess, what changed.
Yeah. So how did you get from, first year agency with two co-founders to where you are now?
A lot of being thrown problems and realizing that it was kind of fun to solve those.
Yeah.
I assume. I guess that's the best way.
Is it always fun, though?
No, it's really only fun to talk about
afterwards.
When we're in this very safe and comfortable environment many years later,
right,
not having to reflect on the pain that it was to actually do it. I mean, that is the truth, that everything looked easy. And actually, it's probably something we should all be more honest about, which is whenever you hear those stories and they tell you like the first day startup story, mm-hmm. and then they skip ahead to the point where they raised a bunch of money and scaled to however many users or, how like us, like however many full-time employees we have. I think it matters to talk about the middle part where it's really messy, and the way that we did that and went through that phase was pretty messy. I mean, I lost my co-founders really quickly, like I think most people do that start a venture without a real vision in the beginning. And by we, I mean, I guess me and the people I hired really quickly determined that there was a much bigger opportunity than what I think we originally intended to do locally. We joined the startup community, and startups really gave us that at-bat that was much more significant than local businesses. Because it turned out local businesses actually were a little bit more safe than what they wanted. Maybe their heads were at, hey, this is game-changing, this is new tech, we need to market differently. But the truth was, they don't put their budget into risky things most often, at least not brick-and-mortar businesses and not businesses that are going to survive or that have survived for a long time. They kind of wait to see what other people do.
Yeah.
It just turns out that the people that do take those risks are early stage and technology driven startups. And so a lot of our community that we found really quickly was companies that invested in agile methodology and, that lived and breathed lean startup and that were willing to test things and to look at their customers and say, they're on social, this is how we acquire them, and give a lot of faith to a team like us that we're hungry and we're willing to work pretty hard to try a lot of things without billing by the hour to figure it out. So we really built our reputation on hiring really great, young, but motivated talent at the time and turning them into really incredible social media marketers and content creators and gaining a lot of clients early stage that were also had faith in a young team that was willing to roll up their sleeves and figure it out. And, that's maybe the easy way of saying what 5 years later looks like, but it was truthfully just a lot of learning and testing, a lot of self-awareness and growing up and adapting to how the marketing landscape is changing and not being afraid to do things the way that it always had been. Because I feel like if there's maybe one way to describe our path, it's never looking at how other agencies were structured and how other people came into marketing service and trying to do exactly what that looks like. Here's what an account manager does. Here's what a structure looks like. Here's what the growth path looks like. And instead saying, what would it look like if we took the best of what methodologies we've sort of come to understand works and do it our way and build a culture the way we want and have that be built on hustle and heart and see where it goes and hiring people that are willing to be in it for the long haul and try stuff.
Do you think that was one of the keys for you guys getting to where you are now, is just your ability to continually test and iterate and try new things?
Yeah, we live and breathe Agile as a methodology, this idea of being able to be very customer focused and try things instead of having one big plan that you execute on and never deviate from. Instead, have those fundamental mission and values, but be willing to try things on a quarterly, weekly, monthly, daily basis and have really open, transparent conversations with your team around what things are working and not, and make changes on that. Yeah, I think it's exactly that has kept us alive past that, that brutal 5-year mark. And
so the last year's been pretty good.
This year's going to be insane. This year's going to be amazing. I feel like we've had a really roller coaster few years, as both anyone in our industry would probably point to, because things come and go. Like, we don't do the same things that we did 3 years ago as a way to make money. We also don't have the same team structure. We're not afraid to kind of rebuild and try things again. And it's that mindset that has to keep you alive, like being relentlessly customer focused. I'm going to listen to what they need, but not be so focused on what you're supposed to look like.
Right. That's an interesting point about what you're supposed to look like in this whole thing. Is it doesn't matter what you're supposed to look like, or is it more about what you can accomplish and what you can get done? And nobody ever gets it on their first try, or if they do, they're very lucky. I would love to know how they do that, but
there's a lot of recipes for success, I think, in the exact business that we run. So the first one is pretty simple. You work at another agency or you work at a brand and you spin out your own company using the revenue you already have by having your first client be that client. Or you take your clients with you and you build a book of business that way. That's a pretty established recipe. You already have the reputation, you have the clients. There are ways of doing it, but to that exact point, we did it the kind of the hard and it was a little bit slower and messier way, which is you just be super passionate about trying to build something from scratch and have people believe in that, but also be really, really focused on value the whole time, because you don't have something to fall back on, like that big foundational client that came with you.
Right. That's got to be, I don't know. It sounds a lot easier when you have that solid client. When you walk into your business, you're like, oh yeah, I've already got revenue.
All right, so I'm assuming that you get some people in the startup community or other places come up to you and be like, yo, Josh, I want to start a business. What do I do? What do you tell them? As you check your notes that you wrote down before.
Well, I tell you that the first thing I tell them is take a lot of notes, because if you're anyone like me, things move really, really fast. Mm-hmm. And I would love to be a Warren Buffett, super wise person that has just this like timeless, simple advice. But the truth is, we're still super deep and early into what we're doing. And it takes, I feel like, a lot of reflection and making a lot of mistakes to look back and be like, oh, wow, yeah, we did learn something there that I can teach someone. And I love to, for that same reason, get a lot of context on the other person first to figure out where are they, what are they starting, what are they motivated by. I mean, if there's anything that we have to do as an agency, as marketers, as consultants, anyone like me or in the kind of field we're in, is ask so many questions and listen a lot to figure out how to actually help someone. Mm-hmm. So that's probably where I actually start. What a cop-out answer, but that's really what I actually do. Is I have to figure out the other person to actually know where to help them, and then afterwards I can give them lots of great general advice from mistakes we've made.
I think that's good advice in general, though, because it's like, if you don't understand what they want, why they want it, anything like that, you're probably not going to be able to give them very good business advice. And if they're a client, you're probably not going to be able to do much for them either. So I think it's just being able to understand where another person comes from and why is probably a really key thing for professional success in general, maybe even personal success too.
Yeah, I fully believe it. I'm a huge proponent of self-awareness. I'm sure you talk about that nonstop. Yeah. And, for me, one of my strengths is individualization. I think a lot about the other person as an individual and their own strengths and weaknesses, but also how they think and how they feel, and try to get to the bottom of that before we engage any further, just so I understand how I can help them. As a general thing, I think it helps to not go into something like this alone, because even to that same point, you're going to learn a lot more about yourself if you have someone to bounce off of, right, and to just call you out, and also to help you make sense of every situation that thinks a little bit differently from you. And right, I feel like there's almost no advice that someone can give that's truly unique at this point. So people just need to keep their eyes and ears open a little bit better. But, one way that I think about the co-founder relationship is that at the very least, you can have 5 co-founders, and that's great, although it's going to be a complicated cap table. But what I would say is, if you have at least another person, I'd be thinking a lot about who is the visionary, who is the integrator, execution person. Mm-hmm. And you're probably a hybrid of those things, because, in some cases, people are pretty remarkable and they're everything. That's not likely that true. You're probably one of those two things at the very least. And if you don't have the counterpart, like I really didn't have for many, many years, I mean, you can still be successful, but it's going to be a lot harder. And it's going to be a lot harder, way harder, if you don't know which one you are and which one you need, because you're going to have a lot harder time finding and hiring that other person. And you're going to spend a lot of time complaining about how some things are off and where your weaknesses are and why things keep falling off the tracks. And in the end, you kind of know, hopefully, that it's because at the end of the day, you need someone else that's responsible for the business that's not just you. I mean, I'm so amazed when people can run and build something totally on their own and have no one else in that same position and haven't built that leadership team because you're a small company and they're just super happy doing it on their own. They are building a very different type of business, I'm guessing. Yeah. And they're maybe a very special person. If you're not one of that 1% special person that can do everything on your own, and you're like me and you're a normal human being, I'm not saying like go do co-founder matching or speed dating and try to find that person, because realistically, they don't just show up out of thin air, and they certainly aren't easy to find just on, from an event like that. I think it just is a matter of facing that reality and being open to the people you hire being that person over time. And when that opportunity arises, seizing that person to fill that other position for you. And for us, it took, 6 years to find that person. So it takes a long time.
How would someone go about figuring out which, I don't remember which term you used, but you said something, you were talking about being a visionary or...
An integrator, yeah.
Yeah.
A term we didn't invent.
How do you figure out which one you are?
Yeah. I think you Google it and take a quiz. I mean, I'm so serious. I feel like almost all things are solved that way. And, even this, I'm only caveating this because I feel like it's relevant, but I'm one of these people, and maybe some of your listeners are, that really are very anti best practice, anti-traditional advice. And when someone says there's two types of people, I immediately tune out, because I live in the gray and the nuance, and I don't like to see things as a framework and as this applies to everything catch-all situation. But there is a really great book that if you're building a business that's going to have any amount of scale and is going to have a team, there's a lot of great businesses that are solo. There's a lot of great businesses that are fully virtual, digital, don't need a lot of full-time staff. Like, that's fine. But if you're going to build a company with a culture, with a headcount, we learned a lot from the EOS model, the Entrepreneur Operating System model, which honestly is kind of just a catch-all accumulation of different, like a curated list of different tools that are all put together in a nice place. And I read that book, Traction, which really spells out how to use these tools, maybe our third year in business, and I totally threw it on the shelf and never looked at it again. And I picked it up 3 years later now, and it's been a game changer for us because we actually are able to implement it. So there's a right time for everything. But where we are now, when I look at something like that, they perfectly describe the visionary as a role that's one that is a person who has constant big ideas, invests in big relationships, is the networker, is, probably that chief biz dev person. Maybe they're more extroverted. I don't know if that's important or not, but they certainly are someone who is always thinking ahead and that you would rely on as maybe that CEO type role. And then there's really more of a COO role, which sometimes is a managing partner or a managing director, or sometimes is a president, or sometimes is just the execution person and what we would call maybe the integrator. And their job is to literally integrate all the functions of the business. They live in the day-to-day. They not only don't get bogged down with all the moving pieces and all the problems that erupt in your middle of your day, and there's a lot of fires that you have to put out, but instead they thrive on that. In fact, they're really good at developing workflows and frameworks and processes and want to do that day in and day out. And I feel like either one of those two things, most people are, again, maybe more of a hybrid. They if you're like me, you like processes, but if you only had to develop scope agreements all day or something, you probably wouldn't love your job. No. You'd also want to think of new business models and try how to innovate and get input from other places. And it's knowing which one you're primarily and which one is your 80-20, which one gives you the most energy, which one you would love to do eventually full time when you ever built the structure to let go of the rest of it. That's, to me, the one that speaks to you most. And there really are quizzes that can help you figure that out. But I do think it's important to otherwise ask the people around you, whether it's your team members and you have that faith and trust in them, or your friends, and have that honest conversation and be like, which one am I really?
Yeah. That's a good place to start, because sometimes it's tough to know, because it's like sometimes you want to be one of those roles, but it's not really your strengths. Like, I think a lot of people think that being a CEO is like glamorous and all this stuff, or being a COO is like a really I don't know. From the outside in, I don't know if a lot of people can tell the difference. And they think that like, oh, well, yeah, I'd totally be a CEO. Not really understanding all the shit that goes into it. Mm-hmm. So it's probably good to understand what each role, like what that role takes, and then getting feedback from people around you, like, what are my strengths, weaknesses, what am I good at? And it's like, all right, well, maybe just put them up on a board, which ones line up with that right role. And you're like, okay, well, if my strengths are over here, how can I find the person that has these strengths and then partner with them? Instead of maybe partnering with who's convenient or who you're friends with.
Yeah, easier said than done. And it's totally sometimes a matter of chance and opportunity. So I do think it's okay to start with good intentions, but to over time build that role.
Yeah.
Because if we're any lesson, it's that we didn't have the execution integrator, sort of managing operations role, but we've always had great people that could fill much of that execution once you know that it's not there. But to really grow, I think, need to find someone as committed to going through the thick stuff. If you ever read a book like The Hard Thing About Hard Things, hopefully I don't skip ahead and pick the book that I'm going to talk about later. I feel like that's a great book that totally cements and perfectly helps articulate the reason why being a founder is unfairly hard. And that's sometimes what you have to do in the beginning is just find someone else that is willing to do that.
Right.
And later figure out if you need another role to come in and be that leader.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Because this is not, I think about the some of the challenging times that I've had personally with some of this stuff. And it's like, it's really not made for everyone. And I've met people that have like opinions on both sides of the table. Like some people are like, man, I wish I could do what you do. And I'm like, God damn it. I don't know if you really do. And then you meet other people and they're like, oh yeah, I don't know how you do what you do. It's so hard. And I'm like, well, it's not that hard. Like whenever anybody says it's like one extreme or the other, I tend to be like, well, it's not all sunshine and rainbows all the time. And it's not this like following your dream and passion and stuff. Sometimes it's like, you're working at like 11 o'clock at night getting ready for a launch or something, and then shit's just hitting the fan. And then other times it's like, yeah, it feels pretty good because you get to kind of like, you've dictated where you are now for the most part. Like you don't get to control, like, yeah, you have to do your books and all that stuff. But other than that, you're really kind of controlling your thing, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so they're taking notes. They got a partner. What's next?
Well, after they know themselves and which happens from all these experiences. I mean, I don't know without that context, right? Maybe that's one of my own faults and strengths is that I need a lot of context to be able to help people. But I would say generally, then they hopefully obsess over the problem they're trying to solve. I will summarize like almost the best advice that we give for companies, and regardless of what industry they are, or even social media marketing, which is the thing that I mostly obsess over, that our company, is sort of known for, is really built on our point of view around what we call sort of the hustle and heart philosophy. It's certainly our core values, but I would say it applies to people that are trying to get started and they're like, okay, now what? Hustle really is about a work ethic, about an agile mindset, about being relentlessly focused on building and testing things. Hustle is definitely the standard when it comes to actually getting anything made. And I know it's an overused word and it's kind of buzzwordy, but it also can't describe any business that isn't, every business that's successful can be described as a company with hustle in their DNA. So however that applies to you, for us, that's sort of an experimental and agile and growth-oriented mindset is one thing. And then heart is about understanding the humans that you're trying to reach. It's about building a company with empathy and that cares about the people within it and cares about quality for what you're doing. And so those two really are contrasts. You need a work ethic that's growth oriented, but you can't just be a black hat growth hacker and actually build something of significance, because you can build something that makes money and it'll collapse under itself if you don't have empathy for the people you're serving and care for the customers, and the team that you're building isn't, supported and compensated well. Like, you need both things. You need to care about the humans, and you also need to care about the work ethic. And so those two sides of the coin come together and create a really great culture and mindset. And whatever people's hustle and heart is for their business is important to figure out. And we certainly know ours, and I think we just try to help other people find theirs.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point is, if you don't have empathy for the people that you're working with or that are working for you or that you are selling your product to, it's like, how do you actually,
it can work, but then they leave. And then the first thing they say in their exit interview or the next hire is, that company didn't care about me. Yeah. Or that company that I used to do business with didn't care about me. And I mean, you can deliver on performance and data all day long. And the second that you lose sight of the person, like the human level, you really lose.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about that in multiple ways, because I wrote an article recently that ended up, it was the first article I've ever written that got republished a few times. I was kind of surprised. And,
congrats.
Thanks, man. It was the first article I ever wrote where I wrote it to an audience of one, though. It was like, I just wrote it to a younger version of myself, and I even put that in the title. And
sounds like there's a lot of use. Yeah,
something like that. And it was interesting because it's like, I cared about that person, because it was previously me, and I wrote it directly to them to that person to help them work through what I really understood what they were going through. And I probably got maybe 2 dozen emails plus another 60 direct messages, which I've never even gotten a single one over anything I've ever written. And all of a sudden I'm getting people oh my God, this just really hit home and all this stuff. And I'm like, what? It just kind of blew me away a little bit. But as I'm thinking through that, it's like the stuff that you make, the products you make, anything really, you almost have to have that understanding of that person when you start making it. Because if you don't, then you end up trying to retrofit it to a general audience where it's not extremely relatable. It's just kind of generic and no one really grasps onto it. But it's the stuff that somebody reads it or consumes it in some manner, and then they can picture a situation in their head where they can directly relate to what you've said. Mm-hmm. I think that's how you create a sustainable business or audience, whether that's through when they use your product, they're like, oh, this person gets my issue. Mm-hmm. And it's easy for them to go to start to finish because you've built it thinking of their needs first versus well, I just need to build a product that does X. Mm-hmm. I need to help Janet down the street do this thing, and Janet has these traits or habits or whatever. I don't know. I just think that's been a big mind shift for me. And then when I wrote that article, I was just like, that's literally the first thing that I've ever done where I was thinking of one individual person. And the fact that it went that well, it's changed how I do everything else now.
Yeah, it hit it home, it sounded like. And you hit on emotional triggers more than anything. The reason people engage is always an emotional trigger. Most internet on the most content on the internet gets shared because it hits on a trigger that either says something like, this is so me, and it relates to their identity and the way that they look at themselves, or it says, this is so us, and it speaks to their community or someone else that they know in their lives, or it teaches them something else about themselves, and it says, this is something I learned about themselves, or it's something that just hits on one of those high arousal emotional triggers, like excitement, humor, happiness. But in other senses, it's just, instead of sharing, you just hit on an emotional trigger that makes someone like relate super well, which sounds like you did successfully. And to do that, you can't sometimes obsess over the data and the persona, speaking marketing language, where we really go deep into what are the attributes when we break out 100,000 people that look like this. And instead, if you just talk to 5 people, like it sounds like you have that sample now, but when you talk to those 5 people and you figure out what makes them tick, right? And you actually get that language. We talk sometimes about this jobs to be done interviewing, which I think you could totally share with your audience, and they could learn a lot around trying to figure out people's, the point at which or the things at which they struggle with, and what job that they're actually hiring a certain product or service to do, like which anyone can figure out. You really can then speak to them, as you're pointing out, in the language in which is inside of their head, in the way that they think. And that type of content or that type of marketing or that type of product that fulfills that is extremely impactful and is authentic and works and converts. And so I think everyone needs to find their version of that. And it only comes from, sometimes getting lucky, I guess, by writing something that's authentic to you. And then it turns out there's a lot of people like you, which I'd imagine does apply to a lot of your audience, or by really just getting to know their audience if they're selling something that's not like them, but instead is something like a person that they can pick out of the crowd. And then instead of marketing to a persona, they're marketing to Jeff, and or they are creating something for Lisa or whoever it is, and they speak to them in the same language.
Yeah, I think the difference between, I've sat through these like persona building things before, and sometimes it's like, I almost feel like people focus too much on the professional side of things, where it's like, well, Jeff goes to work, and this is what Jeff does all day. And it's like, okay, well, that's half the picture. What does Jeff do when he goes home? Does Jeff watch football? Does Jeff have kids?
Yeah, you're not looking at their whole self, right?
Graduate. Yeah, that's where I feel like a lot of people miss out, is they just are like, oh, well, this person is into, well, this is a mistake I made. I'm like, well, I'm just writing people who are into professional development or personal development. And then I'd write something, and then, I'd get a decent number of reads, but no real responses, or no nothing that really hits home. But then it's like, everybody has that like younger version of themselves that went through some tough shit or something. Yeah,
that's an idea that has legs. And that's something that, if there's any filter for that, it's not something that will come out of a persona workshop. It's something that comes out of, if you're writing like a bunch of headlines, which maybe, if you wrote 50 blog posts you want to write, and that one, like the second you wrote it, you felt like some trembles. You're like, ooh, that touches me.
Yeah.
It might actually be a good sign that it's going to impact someone else. It's something that has the nostalgia. It has an element that's going to touch on something that is deeper than, a surface level.
How to meditate, 3 steps to meditate.
Which is not only is that good content in a lot of ways, but that does solve a problem. But sometimes you're not trying to just solve a problem and get on someone's radar to get them to take the next step. You're trying to, get them to feel something. Mm-hmm. And to do that, you really have to go a step deeper. And so, if you don't have that audience to like really pinpoint and go into some, conversation with, to figure out what it is for them that shaped their lives, then, you're gonna have to use yourself as a filter if you are that audience.
I think it's easier to do when you are the audience, though. It's really because you can speak directly to, your deepest, darkest fears or desires or whatever it is. It's like whatever you feel in certain scenarios or situations, you can write directly to that, versus instead of having to guess what that feels like. Like, I imagine I wouldn't be able to write something that would extremely relate to someone who's like a mother, right? Like, I can imagine like, oh yeah, I had a kid, I really care about it and all this stuff, but that deep rooted emotion, like, I will never be able to write at that level to that audience because I can't feel that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that's why we hire a bunch of moms. Sculpt is full of moms.
It's full of moms. Well, we kind of went on a little bit of a down a rabbit hole there, which is fun. I really want to ask you this because this isn't on the list, so I hope this doesn't throw you off too much. But you know, you've been through some ups and downs. You said it yourself. It's been a roller coaster. You've been a part of a lot of different things, whether that's EntreHouse, Sculpt. I don't know, dude. I feel like you've been involved in a lot of stuff. Do you have a favorite failure story or overcoming an obstacle story where just like shit hit the fan and at that moment you were like, this is like the worst possible thing that I could go through, but then you ended up growing through it and it allowed you to become the person that you are today?
I don't know that I have that one story. I, to some extent, hope I never have to suffer something that I feel like is, at the point of life-ending experience and then having to come around. But, maybe reflecting on my life a lot later, I'll be like, man, you did that multiple times. It's hard to know sometimes.
Yeah.
But having many incredible friends and some that we share, I can tell you that there's a lot of things I haven't experienced that other people have, that it's real adversity. And, to some extent, I'm just lucky that I keep my perspective open by surrounding myself with people that have had that. And sometimes I feel like that's okay. I don't want to totally avoid your question because I have totally had about as low of a moment as is possible, both personally and professionally, many times. Like so many that it's so hard to say, well, here was one and one that we should talk about for half an hour. I mean, a lot. And it's probably a couple times a year that something is a true threat to a business that's upending. We've had incredible amount of things that I think would kill a lot of businesses, and we don't end because I'm stubborn is part of it.
Right.
And part of it is because coming back to that first point, I feel like at least I try to surround myself with people that have gone through much harder things, and I try to learn from them. I don't think there's new advice. I think there's people that will always put things into perspective. And what I try to take away is that when those things happen, when something looks really, really bad, you try to get as much context as possible. I can tell you all the things that have helped us in the worst times without getting too specific that were, making people feel bad. But, we've totally been at our version of, at bottom several times, at least that it felt that way. And one thing that's sort of an unfair answer that I always believe in and that I tell everyone around us is that time does heal a lot. Some people choose to use that time to rebuild something totally different and just exit their situation in business or whatever. I don't use it that way. I've wanted to build something that's much more significant and meaningful. And I know that what we're building here, as an example, is going to have much greater value than anything we've created to date. And that actually has so much more potential because it's built on a good foundation. So anytime we're at a bad place, I try to level set with the team and be honest about where we're at, but also use that as opportunity to say, look, here's the context and sort of call to action. What are we going to do? I use it as a time to, bring our team together as much as possible and say, what are we going to do next? And try to, have it not be a me problem where I'm the only one that can fix and save everything, but instead use that time to, instead of like scaring people off where people only want to be part of a rocket ship, which I'm sure a lot of people leave when those times are bad. I've always surrounded myself with people that want to be a part of something that is there even in times that are tough. And so I really lean on our team and, sort of the family we've created to say, here are the things we need to do. How are we going to do them? And problem solve together and sort of crowdsource what we're going to do, and know that honestly, like, time really does heal a lot. And I feel like people are pretty impatient. So they think that a turnaround is 3 months or 6 weeks and they need to see things turn around. I mean, for us, I'm like fully committed to a year of rebuilding. And frankly, last year we rebuilt a lot. We had a great year, but we also were rebuilding a lot of things from a team and structure standpoint. And now we're going to crush it. I mean, it just takes time and a team effort if you're someone like me that relies on other people. And sort of knowing, like, I guess the optimism is maybe a part of that. And then asking for help is a pretty hard thing to do. And it's a pretty non-specific thing to shout out. But I will say that some of the most helpful advice I've ever gotten have been from people that I've had to seek out, when I looked at their resume, their description or whatever, looked like people that had done it before, that were a little bit outside of what we do. Like, there's some sensitive things that you just don't, like, if you're in a bad situation, maybe you don't want to talk to a team member, an employee, a coworker that is going to be sensitive to like risk. But instead you want to talk to a third party outside consultant, coach, someone that's built a business like you, but that's 3x the size and that has gone through similar times. Cause again, there's like no new problem. So you can easily find someone through a social community, through clarity.fm, through something, through Crore, I don't know, through the internet that has been there before. I've hired coaches and I'm not afraid to find someone and pay them or to lean on them for advice.
Yeah.
And
coaches can be really helpful.
Got to do it.
Especially when it's just someone like, we were looking at some of my stuff earlier and like you were like, oh yeah, this is okay, but you need to change some of this stuff around. And I'm like, oh yeah, obviously I see that now. Yeah. But it's like, I do it alone for the most part.
Yeah.
Like I get sent stuff and I'm like, well, I'm in such a hurry to jump between different things that I don't always take the time to think through it. So if I had one other person, sometimes it would just be like, well, I have had somebody who helped me for a while. They're not anymore, but, just having that person to like, be like, all right, hey, can you just double check this for me? Like proofread this or just look at it and make sure it's okay. So, and I think that when people hear coach, I think some people have like a negative connotation towards that, where they're like, well, if they're so good at it, why are they a coach? I'm like, well, is anybody else really going to take the time to like help you out though, as like their job to help you make sure you do a good job?
I know, but I'm so happy when people are skeptical because I feel like you should be so skeptical. I'm the same person. We had never hired. I wouldn't like. In fact, when there's tons of articles around consultant versus mentor. There's reason to be skeptical because these days everyone is a guru, a coach, a expert. And I also believe that sometimes you got to tap people that are not like listed as a consultant and a coach, but that have the right experience you want. And then you figure out what it will take to, how can you add value for them in exchange for their value? And sometimes that's money, sometimes it's something else, but you have to just find the right person, and you can do that by, I truly believe that a business coach sometimes is too broad. For me,
it's way too broad.
For me, I wanted to find someone as an example, 2 years ago, I needed to find someone that had built a social media agency to a certain level, to a certain size, 20 plus full-time employees, let's say. And like, I found that person until I only talked to those people, and the advice that they gave me in 2 hours was more valuable because they spoke the same language and because they had seen the exact same problems, that it took me out of some tough situations.
Yeah.
In that time, that would have taken someone else in a broader capacity, many other, many months. And yet, right now we're just dealing with fundamental business building things with our migration to this EOS framework. And now I just need to talk to like a general person that has done this exact business structure before. And now it's a different set of problems. So you just find the right person for the right issue, and don't be afraid to build a network, a team, an army of people that have specialized advice, and lean on them. It's going to save you so much.
One of my best investments I made in a coach was actually a leadership coach, which I feel like there's so many of them out there. But back when I used to do I feel like we didn't really know each other that well then, but when I used to do like the big meetup group up in Cedar Falls and do I was like team startup meetup groups at that point in time. There was this one lady, Heather Marquez, who came to a bunch of the events, and she never asked for anything. She just showed up, and she's always wearing like a pink suit, and
that's awesome.
Yeah, and she'd actually been like in charge of I want to say probably over 100 people at her previous position, and she invited me to a class that she was putting on, and at that point in time, if anybody asked me that, she asked me, she's like, "Do you think you're a leader?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, she's like, "Well, you're in charge. You just started a group, and there's like 200 people in it. Why don't you think you're a leader?" I'm like, "Because I'm just doing my thing. I don't know." And she's like, "You need to come to this class." I'm like, "How much is it?" She's like, "It's free." She's like, "It's 8 weeks. Show up. It's free." And I went and sat through this class. In my mind, I was like, Heather's a really nice person. She shows up to all my stuff. I'm going to show up and support hers. And then it ended up being like one of the best things I ever did. Because then at the end of it, she was like, all right, who here thinks they're a leader now that didn't before? And I was like, I guess I do. But then I paid her for coaching after that too. And it was just it was nice to have someone who was just fully invested and not afraid to really hold my feet to the fire about decisions I was making. And it's tough to find. Right. I mean, when you make friends, they don't want to they don't want to be like, "Well, dude, I think you're really messing up right now in this area." And she doesn't talk like that, but it's more or less like, "Why do you think that's the right decision? Can you justify that decision?" It's like, "Well, no." I'm like, "Okay, maybe you need to go back to the drawing board and think more about that and maybe plan it out before you make a call." How does that sound? That sounds probably like the right thing to do. I'm not quite sure how I couldn't come up with that on my own, but it's just nice to have that,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, maybe don't hire any coach, but vet your coaches and find. It comes back to the audience of one thing. Are you that coach's audience of one?
Who do you think you coach best? What's your audience of one?
Man.
Who resonated with that post? I'm just curious if that's people that would recognize that too.
That post?
Yeah, if they resonate with that, that means that they felt something strongly about you. And who do you think is your audience of that you can help most? Who do you would coach to?
I think that who I would coach to are people that I'm not going to be able to be like they're 25 to 35 men that have this job title. It's more or less like the people who they go home at night and they lay in bed, because this is me, and I feel like I'm going to tell who this is, and then I'll tell you why I feel like I resonate with them, is because the group would be those that go home at night and they lay in bed and they kind of look up at the ceiling and they think about their day or their life, and they ask themselves where they want to be and how they can get there. And maybe they're looking for a little bit extra, right? They're just like, what am I missing to help me get there? How do they have this deep-rooted desire or hunger to, whether that's change their job, move to a different city or part of the country or part of the world. They have a deep-seated root to travel extensively. They have a deep-seated root to become
they like need that extra motivation. You're definitely someone who's made things happen, and doing that by like learning about yourself piece by piece to try to understand what is stopping you from achieving what you want, and then just tackling that.
Yeah, right? And it's no matter how many people I talk to or how many times I go through this shit myself, no matter how many excuses I come up with personally, it's never anyone else. It's always me. It's like, period, no matter what. Like, you can, I can come up with 100 excuses or 100 reasons why I shouldn't even be doing this podcast interview right now. And people could be like, yeah, that's justifiable. Yeah, I got kicked out of my first college because I didn't know what I was doing, and I drank too much, and I was going through a tough time personally, I basically bankrupt my first business. I've done like all this shit. But I think the thing that has allowed me to always move forward, as we were talking about this earlier, is like, and it really sucks, is like one of the hardest things I ever do is, instead of looking at like, well, this business failed because the market and because my business partner and because of this and because of that, or I got kicked out of school because my instructors are assholes and they just don't get it. Instead, what you do is you take a minute, well, a lot of minutes, and spend some time alone. I do it with a pen and paper, no phone, nothing. Find like a quiet place somewhere where no one's going to bother me. And I just start to think about how I acted in that scenario. What did my gut tell me to do when I was in that position? And then did I listen to it? When I take a step back and I take almost a third-party view of my behavior and how I'm acting or how I'm moving forward on a project or something else, how did I act in that moment? Was it up to my standards? Was it up to, like, if I saw someone else doing that, would I feel that they did the right thing? Did I feel like they did everything they could do? And almost 100% of the time, the answer is no, they did not, or no, I did not. And then it's, and then it's just like, okay, well, how do I move from there to where my standards are? And I think that, so in tying that all together, I think the people that have that desire to move forward in some manner, to find whatever that missing piece is, to maybe confront some feelings or some things that have been holding them back, I think those are the types of people that I resonate the most with, because they, like, I feel like I'm one of them. Like, I've had awful anxiety at different points in time that have caused things to happen that I'm not proud of. I have had, business failures. I've had personal relationship failures. And it's like, it always comes back to me. It's not like, these are things that, maybe with a coach or professional help you can work through, but it's like, I think those people know that it's internal, like, and that's it, really. People that know that whatever their obstacles are on the inside, and they can work through them. I think those are the type of people I resonate with. Whatever the thing is, if they want to get married or get a new job or move, that's it. So that's like the longest rant I've ever gone on, I think. I
feel like you're going to be able to chop that up right there and just put that as the intro to your life. Just it's going to live on your blog, your website, your courses, your podcast, this episode, and it's just like, here's why you're listening. You're probably one of these people. This is who I help most. But anyway, I have that same problem where I just love to help people with that exact same motivation, and I'm glad that you articulated it to me and to your peeps.
And to Snapchat.
Yeah, well, I'm a social being, so this is being recorded for my personal gain as well.
Yeah, that's fair. I believe in mutual wins. Yeah. That's funny. I was recording a video earlier to throw up on our website about, why I started all this stuff. And it really came down to really like all the failures and all the mistakes that I've made, even up when I went through the Iowa Startup Accelerator, and that failed. That was like one of my hardest failures because I felt like I let a lot of other people down. And then it was like, thinking through why I even started in the first place, which is, I knew at that point in time, like, all right, everybody has like this playbook for life, or like the formula, I guess, their formula for how they behave or how they act or how they operate. And I realized that mine was missing some stuff. Like I had some stuff that was caught like in my algorithm, I guess, that was causing me to get results that I didn't want. And this selfishly is part of the way for me to figure that shit out, is to like talk to people like you or other people who have that formula or playbook, and then share it with everyone else.
I believe it. And hopefully it works, I think
I hope it works too.
If anyone makes it to, minute whatever this is, they're gonna believe it too, because I think you're really good at coming around and coming to that conclusion, and also that makes so much sense. And I think everyone needs to find that version of themselves. I'm a true believer that entrepreneurship is probably the fastest way to learn everything about yourself. Mm-hmm. You want to be more self-aware. You want to see what you're capable of. You want to see what kind of person you really are. Literally try to do something from nothing and have it be something, and face every kind of obstacle that exists, from a societal to a personal to a professional level. Like literally, that's the most vulnerable self you have to be, is when trying to build something, however you choose to serve a customer or however you choose to build a team. Like you're going to learn so much so fast that you'll come out the other side a different person, hopefully a better person. It sounds like it was for you.
Yeah. Well, I'm a work in progress.
That's right.
It's funny though. It's because like, even before I started all this stuff, I thought I was a fairly confident person. But then when everything like starts crumbling around you and you're like, oh my God, I don't know how to do anything. Then it's like you really get tested and your confidence really goes to really nowhere. But then I think when it comes back, it's more of a confidence that's built on competence and the belief that, you know what, I know that shit's going to hit the fan. I know that it's going to be tough, but I know that I can get through it and I will get through it. And when I get to the other side, I'm going to be better than I was before.
Hear, hear.
Maybe I should just end it there. But let's wrap up this first part of the show so we can hear the rest of what you have to say.
Sounds good.
So, Josh, what do you try to do on a daily basis that you feel like gives you an edge or makes your day a win?
I am definitely not the person you go to for routine and like habit-based advice. I think you're a better person for that, frankly, and a lot of your guests. But what I will say that we do as a company and what we have instituted is we have our daily stand-up meeting. That's a ritual that's just ingrained in our culture. And so every single day we ask as an entire team, in person or virtually, we ask, what did we accomplish yesterday? What are we going to accomplish today? What obstacles are getting in the way of getting that done? I mean, that's like the simplest thing you could possibly do. But having a start of the day when you're as flexible of a team as we are, where literally your culture is, hey, do what you got to do, be a human, work at home if you have to, show up when you have to. Having an actual start date where we say, look, you can work 2 hours before this at 7 a.m. or you could start work, whenever you need to. But we're officially going to get together. And so you're going to have a check-in with everyone and actually get a chance to solve some of your problems and just hang out for a second at 9:15 every day has just been the most impactful thing we've ever done. We've been doing it for 3, 4, or 5 years now. And it's just not changed. I mean, that's one of those things that when you get on a roll, like no matter how many times you want to add new things to your process, you shouldn't change the things that are working really well. And that's my only thing that's consistent morning to morning.
I think that's a really good point, because I've done the whole freelance traveling thing before for periods of time, and dude, not having like a stable start point, or like some you don't even need to have a routine. You just need like a almost like a post where you're like, all right, this is where I'm starting. Like whether that's you get up and drink a glass of water, or you do yoga, or you do a check-in with your team. I think you need to have that like dedicated.
Yeah.
This is like the whistle to begin the day or something.
Right.
Like that.
Be accountable to someone. Yeah. Even if it's yourself. If it's yourself, you got to have 10 times the discipline in my mind. Mm-hmm. And that's like not me at all. But if you're accountable to at least one other person, and you can make that true by picking a time, then you're in good shape.
I agree. So, most impactful book you've read?
Just because it's timely and where I am at this point in my life, I'll just point people to like the entire library of the EOS book series. EOS is the entrepreneur operating system I was talking about before. It even just saying it out loud makes it seem like it's something you pay $97 for and sign up for a course, but it's not that at all. There's a book called Traction, which is what it's based on, which is what I was trying to explain before, which is really just accumulation of some of the best business ideas about growing a business with real structure. If you're like me and you're kind of a agile, flexible, visionary kind of person that thrives on going with the flow, having a book that you and at least one other person reads that can put like really simple meeting frameworks in place and structures in place, like an accountability chart and a like way to identify and solve problems. It just is game changing because it's so simple. And then the book that was game changing from a empathy standpoint was The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is, the book by Ben Horowitz that really spells out his startup story. And, long before, Andreessen Horowitz, he's one of the bigger venture capitalists that's really helped build Silicon Valley and is one of the most respected folks in the industry, and yet perfectly explains what it's like to start a company and why you have to make decisions that have no right answer, and that when every other book makes it seem so simple that you just turn left, or that you just, add two things, to be able to read a book where some of the most successful people on earth are like, yeah, this sucks. And it just sucks even worse as you grow. Yeah. And here's how you deal with laying off 500 people. It just puts things in a perspective. It makes you feel good. Yeah.
I've read that book before, and it was like, it made me feel good, but it also made me feel like shit, because I was like, damn. I was hoping there would be a like rainbow at the end of the, or not a rainbow, but like a pot of gold at the end, something like that. But
it sounds like it kind of was to some extent. He did okay in the long run. Right. I think it shows you, right? Like you deal with incredible hardships and tension, and you ultimately are going to survive as a human being if you're resilient enough. And here's how you stay mentally sound as best as you can if you're able to do that. And it's sort of a mental toughness book. And I realize that's a more sensitive subject because there's a lot of things that can, get in the way of that. But it's a book that I think you read once and you read it then and you had one perspective, and then I bet you'll read again in 2 years when you've got 10 employees or when you've got, a million people listening or whatever it is. Yeah. And you're going to read it again and it's going to have a whole different effect.
Yeah, probably. I had that experience recently with a few books. Actually, I feel like I'm going to do a commercial. Have you read the book Ready Player One yet?
Nope.
Yeah.
Like the movie?
It's a book, dude. It's a book.
I'm just kidding.
It's gonna be.
I know. I wanted to be that guy for a second.
That's fine. I should have known. But it's. I just reread that because the movie's coming out, and dude, I loved that book so much. Like it's probably one of the only fiction books I've read in the last year. Or I listened to it on Audible. Will Wheaton read
Cool.
it, and it was so good. So you should read it.
All right.
Or listen to it, and then go to the movie.
All right, write it down.
Well, you being a child of the internet, and I'm sure you played some video games growing up, it's gonna be awesome for you. But yeah, I should probably wrap this up.
Okay.
So, Josh, I just want to say thanks for taking the time to show up, and I'm really glad that over the last few years I've gotten to know you and be friends with you. It's been a good thing, and
It's been something.
it's been something. Going to South by Southwest and shit. No, I mean, I think I've always admired what you've been able to do at Sculpt, and I think you do a really great job. And I feel like that things are going to continue to go your way, just with your work ethic and how you treat people. And I'm really excited to see where it goes for you.
Thank you.
So, is there any message that you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Man, if they made it this far, I ought
At least
to.
3 did.
I ought to give you anything for free that you want.
Oh, don't say that. Don't say that.
If you email me and want something, tell me how you really feel. I'd love to actually hear what you thought all the way through. If it really did help you, I mean, man, I would actually love to hear from you. Josh@wearesculpt.com. Please do email me. I think if they did make it all the way through, they'd probably learn more about you than any other podcast that you've taped so far. So I hope that they've also learned about themselves in the process. And my parting message is something that I've thought a lot about in the last year of my business and life, which is something that I wish I did realize more as I was growing and as I was trying to figure out my own thing, which is that I've always been a person of good intentions. And I think a lot of people have good intentions. Mm-hmm. And I really want people to think anytime they're forced to make a decision or when they're up in a situation where they have to do something, that as long as they realize that there is, I should be careful how I say it, but something along the lines of that I truly prioritize action over intention. That good intentions are good, but doing something about it is better. Even if you do one small thing, you want to help someone. And so you come up with a million good ideas for how you can help them, but you don't do a single thing. You don't get any points in life for wanting to do good things. And that's a really hard thing to say when you're a person like me that listens to a lot of podcasts and feels good because they listen to a lot of good podcasts. Yeah. They listen to good advice. Doesn't matter. You have to do one thing. So I would always advise someone, something I've come to realize and appreciate is action over intention. And just find some way when you're facing a situation where you can do something. Don't feel good about it. And I'm not going to get political. There's a lot of reasons that you might want to do something. Just do something. Any action is better than intention.
Well, folks, that is a wrap for this week's show. Big thank you to Josh for taking the time to chat with me on this episode. And if you want to find out any information about what Josh is up to at Sculpt, go ahead and head over to wearesculpt.com. That is ARE, not OUR, sculpt.com. So thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. I really appreciate it. Now, if you think that you would find any more podcasts, blog posts, online classes, anything like that helpful or something that you might be interested in, go ahead and head over to helixacademy.co and sign up for our newsletter. I'm Trevor Carlson, and I look forward to you tuning in next time. This episode of The Formula was produced by Helix Academy, and the music was provided by the artist known as Moods. Make sure and check him out on Facebook or Spotify. That's MOODS.